Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to also thank all the witnesses. It's been very educational for me, listening to the importance of integrated planning, and you've clearly kind of educated us on the challenges that you all face in terms of what local governments and municipalities have to do in complying with the Clean Water Act, their requirements with your limited resources. And I appreciate that EPA has begun to work with you about developing new approaches that lower costs but still meet water quality and environmental standards. But I want to emphasize, just before I ask the question, something that's been brought up by many of you on the panel, that we're not talking about the weakening of these standards that are so important to the health of our community. And this should not be used as a rollback of the Clean Water Act. We've seen examples when we've done that, when we've let costs just dictate, i.e. Flint, Michigan, where costs dominated what could be done. I'm very concerned because, as we move forward, that we'll see in the next budgetary process that the President has recommended a 31% cut to the Environmental Protection Agency. I think that'd be devastating. That would be just all the discussions that we've had today, I think, would kind of end. My first question is for Larry Levine of NRDC. In your testimony, you expressed support for the general concept of integrated planning, but like some of what I just mentioned, you caution us that not all integrated planning bills currently before this subcommittee approach integrated planning in the same manner. And you suggest that House Resolution 465, quotes, would roll back existing standards, it would roll back the Clean Water Act protections. Can you talk to us a little bit of how you see H.R. 465 weakening existing Clean Water Act protections under the guise of integrated planning?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Lowenthal. So in several ways, the bill would roll back key protections under the Act. The language in the bill would use both cost under the heading of economic affordability and a new terminology in the Act of technical feasibility, and the definitions for those terms would use those to do an end run around water quality protections currently in the Act. The Clean Water Act already includes ways to account for cost and technical feasibility, such as the process for doing a use attainability analysis or a variance from water quality standards under very limited circumstances and subject to the approval of EPA, just as any other change in a state water quality standard must be approved. The bill, unlike that process, would inject these cost factors into individual permitting decisions at the discretion of the individual permitting agency. The other language in the bill treats wastewater and stormwater as though it were not a, quote, core public service. It indicates the importance of balancing the cost of Clean Water Act compliance against money that might be diverted from other, quote unquote, core public services. That's a misframing of the entire issue. I think we all would agree that urban municipal wastewater, stormwater, drinking water services are all a core public service. The bill also essentially puts on blinders to ways that municipalities and utilities can reduce cost burdens on low-income households while generating the revenue that's needed to meet Clean Water Act goals. So, for example, rate structures, while there are state limitations in some places on the way that local rates can be structured, there are also many things that can be done to have more equitable rates that place costs more fairly on who's putting the most burden on the system, which will tend to help low-income households. The bill also substitutes this notion of reasonable progress for actual compliance. Existing law has requirements for what a compliance schedule must look like and what it must achieve. A compliance schedule must require compliance as soon as possible with interim milestones along the way to ensure accountability for making making those steps as soon as possible towards ultimate compliance. It does not, under current law, lower the bar for what ultimately has to be achieved at the end of the day. I'll briefly mention two more points. The bill fails to account for the benefits of investing in clean water while focusing exclusively on the costs. It's important that communities have a return on the investment they make. It's not simply a liability. And finally, other language in the bill provides essentially a one-way ratchet to weaken requirements in integrated plans. There's language that speaks of revisiting plans when permits are renewed in order to consider modifying or removing requirements to, quote unquote, help the municipality comply. That clearly seems to be an intent to consider weakening plans over time rather than ensuring compliance in the long run.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, just before I yield back, I'd like to say my legislative director just received her PhD from the University of Notre Dame, and she is always talking about Mayor Pete in a very positive way.
Fantastic.